This demonstration illustrates how to perform the initial configuration of the NetBackup Appliance 5330 that is new or has been reset to the factory defaults after a factory reset. Before we begin, let's discuss some of the important configuration guidelines. When you perform the appliance initial configuration, Symantec recommends that you take precautions to avoid loss of connectivity. Any loss of connectivity during initial configuration results in a failure. Before the configuration, ensure that you have the details of the IP addresses, network names, DNS information, storage unit names, disk pool names, and so on. Make sure that the required ports are open on any firewall that exists between a master server and a media server. The appliance ships with a not for resale or NFR license key that expires after a specific period of time. The appliance does not provide a warning message that this license key is about to expire. Thus, Symantec recommends that you change this key to a permanent key after you install and configure the appliance. See the Symantec NetBackup Appliance Administrator's Guide for information and instructions on how to view and change a license key. Replace the NFR keys with permanent keys before they expire. To configure the NetBackup Appliance 5330 as a media server, the master must use the appropriate software version. If it's an appliance master server, it must use appliance software version 2.6.1 or later. If it's a traditional master server, it must use NetBackup version 7.6.1 or later. If the master server is not running a supported version, it must first be upgraded to the supported software version along with other applications such as Op Center, if present, before setting up the NetBackup Appliance 5330 as a media server in an existing NetBackup environment. Finally, make sure that the date and time of the NetBackup Appliance 5330 matches the date and time on the master server. You can use an NTP server or set the time manually. Before you configure a new NetBackup Appliance 5330 for the media server role, you must first update the configuration on the master server that you plan to use with it. These changes allow for appropriate communication between the master server and the new media server appliance. So log into the master server as the NetBackup administrator. On the main console window in the left pane under NetBackup Management, expand Host Properties and select Master Servers. In the right pane, click on the master server hostname and verify the NetBackup version under the version column. As discussed earlier, the master server version should be 7.6.1 or later, or appliance version 2.6.1 or later for managing a NetBackup Appliance 5330 media server. To add the NetBackup Appliance 5330 as a media server, double-click on the master server hostname. On the Host Properties window in the left pane, click Servers. In the right pane, in the Additional Servers section, click Add and enter your NetBackup Appliance 5330 hostname. The appliance hostname should appear in the Additional Servers section. If the appliance has more than one hostname, you must add all of the names. Click OK and close the Master Server Properties window. Note that if the master server is an appliance, this process of adding the NetBackup Appliance 5330 as an additional server can also be done using appropriate clish commands. During the initial configuration, the NetBackup Appliance 5330 communicates with the master server to register itself as a media server. It is recommended to add host entries for the NetBackup Appliance 5330 and the master server on the Appliance 5330 prior to performing the initial configuration. This will help prevent any name resolution issues from impacting the appliance to master server communication and hence causing the initial configuration to fail. This task must be performed through clish. This method requires that you connect a laptop directly to the appliance port NIC1 or ETH0 and set the IP address of the laptop in the 192.168.229 range with a netmask value of 255.255.255.0. Ensure that you can ping the 192.168.229.233 IP address from the laptop before proceeding ahead. Now to connect to the NetBackup Appliance 5330 clish menu, launch PuTTY on the laptop and type 192.168.229.233 in the address bar, which is the default IP address assigned to port NIC1 or ETH0 of the NetBackup Appliance 5330. When connected, log on with the admin user account with the default password, which is P@SSW0RD. Upon successful authentication, you will be connected to the appliance clish main menu. Type the network command on the clish prompt to navigate to the network menu. On the network menu, type the command hosts space add space the fully qualified host name of the NetBackup 5330 appliance space the IP address to add host entries for the appliance name. Following the successful execution of this command, add host entries for the master server using the same command. At this point, you can also add host entries for any additional servers and clients in the NetBackup infrastructure this appliance will communicate with. It's important to note that these steps performed through clish are not necessary if you are using a domain name system for name resolution. At this point, we are ready to perform the initial configuration of the NetBackup Appliance 5330 and set it up as a media server. To start the configuration, open a web browser and type https://192.168.229.233 in the address bar. Make sure to confirm the security exception to proceed. On the appliance login page, log on with the admin account and the default password, which is P@SSW0RD. The Welcome to Appliance Setup page first appears when you log on into an unconfigured appliance. On this page, review the summary of information that you need to perform for the initial configuration. Symantec recommends that you click on the Download a Checklist link and use it to record all of the necessary information before you begin the configuration. After you have completed the initial configuration, store this checklist in a secure location for future reference. After you filled out the configuration checklist, click Set up Appliance to start the configuration. On the Storage Overview page, check and verify the status of the connected hardware components. This page identifies any component cabling problems between the appliance compute node and the primary storage shelf or the expansion storage shelf. Disk drive problems are also identified if any exist. The diagrams here use specific icons to indicate whether any component cable or disk drive problems exist. If there are no problems identified, click Next to start the initial configuration. Otherwise, click on the warning or the error icon to see a description of the problem. Errors may come up due to cabling issues, disk drive issues, and so on, and need to be resolved first before proceeding with the rest of the configuration. Warnings may come up in instances such as when both power supplies are not connected and will not prevent you from proceeding with the configuration. Symantec recommends that you resolve all problems before you start the initial configuration. Please note that if you cannot resolve any error problems after verifying all of the previous items and refreshing, stop here and contact Symantec Technical Support for further assistance. The network configuration page contains the taskbars to complete specific network configuration tasks with the associated data entry fields for configuring IP addresses, creating bonds, VLAN tagging, and adding static routes. Expand each taskbar to enter the relevant network configuration information. Please note that these functions are independent of each other and do not require configuration in the order in which they appear. To configure an IP address for port ETH1, select the checkbox against ETH1 and click on Edit. This opens the Properties page for ETH1. The IP address can be either IPv4 or IPv6. Enter the IP address and the subnet mask here. After you have entered the appropriate data into all the fields, click OK to save the configuration. Click OK again on the summary page, which should show that the update was done successfully. To configure bonding, you must select multiple interfaces and select the bond mode from the Create Bond drop-down box. After you have entered all the necessary information, click Next. On the host configuration page, enter the fully qualified host name of this appliance and the related host resolution information. For DNS systems, enter the domain name suffix, DNS server IP address or addresses, and search domain or domains, and then click the plus icon to add the address. Repeat as necessary for the number of addresses that you want to add. After you have entered all the necessary information, click Next. Please note that if you cannot resolve any error problems after verifying all of the previous items and refreshing, stop here and contact Symantec Technical Support for further assistance. On the password change page, enter a new password to replace the default password. Password should meet appliance password complexity requirements that require use of at least one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter, one number, and a special character. Please note that to continue with the initial configuration, you are not required to change the default password. However, to increase the security of your environment, Symantec recommends that you change the password periodically. Make sure to keep a record of the current password in a secure location. After you have entered all the necessary information, click Next. On the Date and Time page, enter the appropriate date and time for this appliance. The date and time for this media server appliance must match the date and time of the associated master server. You can enter the information manually or use a Network Time Protocol or NTP server to synchronize the appliance date and time over the network. After you have entered all the necessary information, click Next. On the Alerting and Call Home page, enter the information for this appliance to send alerts or to upload status reports by email to a Symantec Call Home server. After you have entered all the necessary information, click Next. On the registration page, enter information such as appliance name, company name, street address, city, state province, zip or postal code, the country, contact name, contact number, to register this appliance with Symantec over the internet. After you have entered all the necessary information, click Next. Please note that you may see an error message on this page if the appliance cannot connect to the Symantec Call Home server over the internet. But this error will not prevent you from proceeding with the rest of the appliance configuration. On the Specify Master Server page, enter the name of the master server that you plan to use with this media server appliance and click Add. If the master server is clustered, the first entry must be the virtual host name of the cluster, followed by each additional host name. Note that at this stage, the role configuration process starts the storage initialization. Depending on the number of disk drives in the system, the storage initialization can take up to 46 hours to complete. As a result, appliance backup and restore performance is degraded until the storage initialization process is completed. After you have entered all of the necessary information, click Next. On the storage configuration page, create names for the storage units and the disk pools that you plan to use, and configure the size of the disk partitions. You can configure storage partitions for advanced disks, for deduplication or media server deduplication pool or MSTP, or for both. Please note that if you configure MSTP storage, a policy is automatically created in the background to protect the MSTP catalog. Symantec recommends reviewing this policy and activating it once your appliance is configured. After you have entered all the necessary information, click Next. On the configuration progress page, you can monitor the progress of the appliance as it applies all of the data input from the configuration pages. The amount of time for the configuration to complete varies and depends on the complexity of your environment. On the Summary of Configuration page, review the results of the configuration. Examine the results to make sure that the configuration completed successfully. This page also identifies any errors that may have occurred. You may need to perform the initial configuration again if errors appear in the results.